All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday, the midpoint of the week, but actually not because we have a short 4-day week. Let's see. So I'll just say good morning to people very quickly before we start. So Michaela's here. Good morning, Michaela. And Ananda's here. Good morning. And Ayushi is here. Good morning to you. And Rose is here. Good morning, Rose. And Ashley's here. Good morning. Kevin's here. Good morning, Kevin. And Adelbert's here. Good morning, Adel. And Hadil's here. Good morning. And Shania's here. Good morning to you. So, little housekeeping to start with. So, of course, on Microsoft Teams, I posted a message. We'll have a little quiz tomorrow on classes, I think, 11 to 20. Same as we did before. So if you are, if you're an online student, I will do a little video conference with you starting at 8 o'clock Vancouver time. And if you are a student who's in Vancouver and you're coming to class, then you'll come in here and you'll write a paper test at 9. So you'll get to sleep in just a little bit. Also, it's probably a good point or a good time to reconfirm our kind of official policy here. So if you are an online student, if you're in another country, or if you've spoken to me or Sarah about being online, then that's fine, you're online. But if you are in Vancouver and you are not sick, you should be in class, okay? So I just wanted to confirm that because I'm looking out at the vast sea of faces in front of me here. And it's actually not that vast. There's only a few people here, and there should be more. So if you haven't spoken to me and you're not in another country or quarantining or something, you should be here. So hopefully we'll see you here tomorrow. Other than that, ready to go? Ready? Okay. So yesterday we were talking about, oh yeah, we were doing that thing. We were... we had a few questions, and I think the first question, correct me if I'm wrong, was it why was the actions of the Soviet Union so concerning? Was that the first one? Yeah, and why was it so concerning for countries like Britain and France? I mean, Britain and France. What's that? It was almost accidental, and then I made it intentional. Yeah. But I've done that before. For some reason, when I'm talking about this period of history, Britain and France and Germany, I can't get them all straight, and they just come out in I either say the wrong country, or it comes out as a combination of the two, Fermany or whatever. Okay, what was the concerning action by the Soviet Union, and why was it so concerning? You think what? Okay, so the Soviet Union invaded Poland. That seems like a regular activity for a Tuesday. Why was that so concerning? That's what everyone does on Tuesday. They invade Poland. Sorry.
They had a non-aggression pact with Germany.
Right. So the Soviet Union did have a non-aggression pact with Germany, but what are Britain and France thinking at the moment when the Soviet Union invades? Right, so they'd been watching, Britain and France had been watching Germany rearm, and they'd been watching Hitler become more and more aggressive and taking over territory, and then suddenly out of nowhere, in comes the Soviet Union taking over territory as well, right? And the question is, oh shoot, do we have two enemies? Do we have two problems now? We thought we just had one, right? And most importantly, how are we going to get our Polish sausage now? No. That wasn't what they were thinking. Anyway, what was question number 2? Remind me.
Why was the initial phase of the Second World War called the phony?
Oh yeah, it's an easy one. Why was it phony, Rose? Why was the first part of the war called phony? Or Aliana, you can help out too. This is a collaborative effort. Question is, why was the first part of the war called the Phony War? Yeah, no real action took place. Nothing really happened. No fighting. The Allies declared war on Germany, and then kind of not much, right? Although there was fighting still occurring in Europe, right? There was some fighting going on in Poland. There was some fighting going on in the Baltics and in Finland, I believe. But in terms of Britain and France's involvement, pretty quiet, right? And again, phony is kind of an old slang word for fake, which nobody uses anymore. But now that it's attached to this historical event, we're going to use it forever and ever. But nobody uses phony. Question number 3, what was it? What was it? Oh yeah, the fall of France. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. It was a horrible thing for France, but what happened to poor France? They built a fort, pillow fort, blanket fort? No, more involved. What did they call their fort? What? The Maginot Line, Blanketsburg, or Pillow Town. Anybody watch Community here? Never mind. Okay, it wasn't called Blanketsburg or Pillow Town. It was called the Maginot Line. That was the name of their fort, right? And so they built a fort with all kinds of guns and fortifications and tunnels and supplies. And of course, they left an opening where there were trees, right? And again, I'm making fun of this. I've actually never seen a picture of what this kind of gap in the Maginot Line looks like, so I'm not sure how obvious it was. But either way, we know that the Germans kind of just rolled right through there. And it's a big hole, but I mean, I wonder what made them think that tanks could not traverse it. That's what I heard too. I'm not sure what that terrain looked like. The other thing that might be a factor here too is that, of course, tank technology, has improved, right? It's almost 30 years after the First World War, right? And in the First World War, tanks had just been invented, right? They were brand new. The first ones kind of worked, sort of. So, tank technology has come along quite a ways at this time. But anyway, so the Germans roll into Paris, they force the French to surrender, and then what happens to France? I think this is the next question, right? Question 3 or 4, whatever. What happens to France?
Divided.
Yeah, France gets divided. What's happening in the north? Yep, so the Nazis occupy it and sort of run it as their own. What happens in the south? The Fish government? It still sounds like fishy when you say it. The Vichy government, right, is in southern France. They are administering the southern part of France, but who are they really taking their orders from? Nazis, right? So they're allowed. The government is allowed to exist in southern France, but really they're getting all of their orders from the Nazis, right? And they are trying to basically just do what their overlords say. What else is there involved in this occupation? A lot of money. Yeah, there's reparations going from whom to whom? From who to whom? Yeah, so the Nazis charge the French millions and millions, hundreds of millions of francs in order to occupy them, right? Which seems a little unfair. Seems like they're still a little bitter about those reparations from the Treaty of Versailles, right? They're clearly not over it. I don't know. Like it would certainly be more because, well, it's hard to say, right? Because it would depend on the value of the franc, and then you'd have to change it to $20. I think in any period of history, 300 million francs a day is a lot of money. And keep in mind that how many, the textbook said how many times it was the amount that Germany paid France during the Did it say, remember? It was right around that part in the text where it said, what's that? I thought it was more than that.
I remember they mentioning the rich people being taken away.
For the first payment.
Yeah, and then they paid them.
I think we could safely assume that this is a boatload of money that they have to, so this is a lot of money going to Germany, right? So I think we can say that. Question 4 or 5, where are we now? 5? Okay, what's number 5 there, Amanda? Oh, yes, okay. So what is the Battle of Britain? It's kind of not really a battle, right? Right, so part of it is that Operation Sea Lion, and what's that about? Right?
That failed, so they started bombing, and they bombed London, and everything just went.
Everything just went whoosh. Mostly there, yeah. So it starts out with that Operation Sea Lion. The Nazis plan to invade Britain, although again, it's not much of a plan because it's not workable, right? The Germans don't have control of the English Channel. The English have a very strong navy, so they don't really have the space to get across because they'll get sunk if they try. Plus, they don't really have the ships to transport their troops to Britain anyway. So, I don't know. That doesn't sound like much of a plan to me. It feels like the best part of that plan is the name because it's really not workable. So anyway, they start bombing fighter bases around the southern part of Britain, and that kind of eventually leads to bombing British cities and towns, right? And London itself gets pummeled in the process of this and they call it the Blitz, right? And so we saw that poster yesterday of keep calm and carry on, which is exactly what the British government was asking the people to do, right? Because they're getting bombed, right? Like frequently, and it's just regular people trying to take their kids to school and go to work, and they're getting bombed by the Nazis on a frequent basis, right? What were the Nazis trying to do?
Bombing the cities.
Yeah.
Part of it was just Hitler trying to do something about his embarrassment when the building was bombed.
Right.
The other part was to demoralize the British.
So we said this whole thing got started because of Berlin was bombed by the British, and then Hitler was kind of angry and embarrassed, and so he started bombing London. And it was to demoralize the British and to get them to probably do what? What do you think? Yeah. So Hitler's trying to force British surrender, right? So he knows he can't invade. He knows that Britain is still a threat to him. He can't invade the island. He doesn't have the ability to invade the island. So he's going to pummel London with bombs until finally the British people say, "Ugh, this is enough. This is awful. Let's give up. Let's quit," right? But what actually winds up happening? Do they quit? What's that?
One of the short stories that they backfired.
It backfired, and so what does that mean?
They were not doing
They were not demoralized, and in fact they were the opposite of demoralized, right? So they came out of that, and how did they feel? I think we heard a little bit of that feeling in Winston Churchill's speech yesterday. How did they in fact feel? How did they feel? What?
How did the British feel?
Yeah. How did the British feel? Good.
Wasn't the speech meant to
Oh, thank God there's alcohol in here. No, I'm just kidding. There's no alcohol in there.
the speech meant to encourage them? Yeah.
Well, the speech was meant to encourage them, but they come out of that bombing more determined, right? So Hitler's trying to demoralize them to make them feel, oh, this is awful. Let's just quit. We don't want to be bombed anymore, right? And the British come out of it instead like, we are going to win this thing, right? We are PO'd now, right? And so we are not backing down. We're not giving up. Never, 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 right? So
There's one thing, the British were still getting food and supplies from Canada and America, right?
yes. Yes. What's that? No. In about 1940, we're a reasonably independent country at that point. We still have some, kind of legal ties to the British Empire at that time, and we still have a pretty strong allegiance to Britain. A lot of people who are living in Canada are kind of British descendants, and so there's still a pretty strong connection between those two countries. We kind of do what we want at that point, Canada does, but there was a strong relationship between the two countries, and I think it would have been very odd for Canada to say, yeah, you're on your own. Like we still kind of had their back to a strong degree, even though we were pretty much autonomous at that point, except in a few ways, but we don't have to get into that. Okay, so the British emerge determined and unbent, right? They are going to win this war no matter what, right? So whoops, Hitler, you're right, that backfired. Next question, is it 6 or 7? I've lost track. 6? Okay. What's number 6?
Yeah, we haven't got there.
Have we got to 5?
How did the entry of the United States to the Soviet Union change the outlook of the
Oh, okay, so we're there already. Okay, so very quickly, how does the Soviet Union get involved in this war? I thought there was a non-aggression pact. I thought they were buddies. I thought Hitler and Stalin were BFFs.
They were until Barbarossa came around.
Oh, okay. So their relationship became complicated, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
Hitler had a new BFF.
Yeah. So what happened? What's this Barbarossa thing?
Yeah, Hitler ordered his forces to attack. They invaded Russia. They got all the way until, I don't know, 95 or something like that from Moscow. Then the Russians used their faithful ally Winter and they pushed them back all the way to Poland.
Okay.
That's
Good short summary, right? So Hitler decides that now he's going to attack the Soviet Union, right? Which he does. That, of course, brings the Soviet Union into the war. Okay, let's deal with that. Because the next question is about that the progress of the German army, right? What's the next question? Number 6? 7.
What factors contributed to the inability of the Germans to defeat the Soviet Union in their initial invasion?
Right. Okay, so Ahmad, as you've mentioned, Hitler decides to invade the Soviet Union. This is his Operation Barbarossa. All these operations have to have cool names, right? Barbarossa and Sea Lion and etc. I don't know anymore. So he decides to invade the Soviet Union, and the Nazis experience a lot of success, right? And they're able to cover a lot of ground and actually get very close to Leningrad and to Moscow, right? Which are kind of the primary cities in the Soviet Union. That's probably not surprising, right? Because, Stalin probably wasn't entirely ready to be invaded by the person who he signed an agreement with. Although, what's that?
Stalin was like a real fight. He was like he had the people he had on the field. They would constantly communicate with him, telling him, dude, they're bombing us, just give the order. And he would be like, we don't want to start a war, wait.
He didn't want to start a war, probably, but also, we'll get to this later, but maybe this is a little bit early, but Stalin is kind of notoriously paranoid. What's that? well, I don't know if he's an idiot, but he was very paranoid about the West, for instance, so he never entirely trusted those sort of Western allies. The degree to which he trusted Hitler, I'm not really sure, but he was famously very paranoid. So I think it's probably fair to say that he wasn't totally unprepared, but still, Hitler kind of stabbed him in the back, right? They had a deal not to attack each other, and here's Hitler attacking him, right? So the Nazis experience a lot of success. They cover a lot of ground, but then they're really not able to ultimately succeed. And so, Ahmad, you mentioned that winter shows up, right? And so a Russian winter is not to be toyed with, right? Russian winter is cold. There's some other factors, though, as well. What other factors keep the Nazis from being able to succeed?
They run out of supplies.
Yeah, the thing is that the Blitzkrieg, the whole Panzer things, they move really fast.
Yeah.
So yeah, they moved real fast, and the supply lines and the infantry just couldn't keep up with them. So they got to a point where they just didn't have fuel or munitions, and they got locked down. They
Yeah.
had to wait. So when they wait, the Soviets fortify their positions, and then their attacks fail, and they get counterattacked.
Yeah. One of the things that you always have to worry about with your army is, of course, your battle strategy and your technology and all that kind of stuff. But one of the sort of boring details of military campaigns is supply lines, right? You have to make sure that your soldiers that are shooting at the other guys have food, right? And have more bullets and have tents and sleeping bags and places to go to the bathroom and all of that stuff, right? Which is kind of boring and not very exciting, but you have to have those things, right? And if you don't have them, your army is going to not be able to fight, right? And so here we see that this blitzkrieg tactic that Hitler is using to sort of, just roll into countries really quick and surprise them and take over, yes, it works really well, unless you move so fast and so far that your supplies can't keep up, right? And so that's what happens here, is that the Nazis are so successful and they move so fast that they can't keep their supplies, they can't continue to get supplies to the front line, right? And then your army is going to be compromised, right? If they've got no food or nowhere to sleep, well, I guess there's always somewhere to go to the bathroom, right? But I mean, and anything is a bathroom if you make it. But I mean, yeah. So, but there's other factors too. What are some of the other factors? It has to do with the cold.
Oh, so yeah, the Hitler soldiers didn't get the winter clothing things. They froze.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the German army isn't outfitted for winter fighting, right? They kind of roll in there, and then whoops, it's freezing, and nobody has winter jackets, right? There's stories. I don't know if this comes out of the text or somewhere else, but there's stories of like German soldiers like stuffing newspaper into their coats because they're just wearing regular coats and they're freezing out there, right? And so, of course, the Russians are going to be a little bit better supplied because they're used to this sort of thing. But yeah, like how is your army going to win when they are getting hypothermia, freezing to death, right? There's something else too. Yeah.
Like in this battle, did women participate?
I would say no, although probably I know the documentary we saw in World War I indicated that some women found their way into the military, so I think it's safe to say that probably some did here as well, but you're probably talking about very small numbers. So most of the women directly involved would have been in field hospitals as nurses and code breakers and office workers and things like that.
So like World War I didn't teach them anything too?
No, they probably wouldn't have involved women to much of a greater degree at this point, unless you count Agent Peggy Carter, but she's special and fictional. Right, there was another thing going on too that led to the Germans not being able to capitalize on their gains.
Did that have anything to do with the delay because they had a new tank model and they wanted to send it in and then roll with it. So the tank models, until they were prepared and sent into battle, it took some time. And even worse, when they got into battle, they were assembled real quick and they couldn't go through all the tests. So you just see the tank is moving and all of a sudden it catches fire.
Okay, that part I didn't know about, but that's possible too. So they had a new tank model that was kind of untested technology, right? And so the new technology is a little problematic. Yeah, the new technology is problematic. There was something about these meetings in September, if I recall. They had some strategy meetings, so they kind of paused. Hitler, I think. Does that ring a bell to you? To anyone? I thought there were some meetings in September, some strategy meetings in September, and so the Nazis kind of took a pause when in fact it would have been better for them to use that time to invade, because as the weather deteriorates, it becomes more difficult to move over Soviet terrain. I thought there was something about that as well. And there's one more. There's one more thing as well. They had all kinds of issues. They had one more issue. Had to do with moving so fast. What happens when you move too fast in a military advance in World War II, in the Soviet Union? Yeah, you get tired. But, come on, people. Huh? Maybe.
So you're not trying to bring up the supply thing again?
I'm not trying to bring up the supply thing again. We've dealt with that. What? Give you another hint. No, I don't have another hint. It had to do with moving too fast. That was the hint. Yeah. Yeah. No, well, no, the soldiers kept up. But what did they leave behind them?
They left the country unarmed?
Well, close. Yeah, they actually left Soviet troops behind them. So they actually went so quickly and they advanced so quickly that they actually bypassed some of the Soviet troops. And so very quickly they were fighting Soviet troops on the front, but they also had to kind of watch their back because they hadn't taken out all of the Soviet troops behind them. And so they kind of advanced so quickly that they left part of the Soviet army behind them, and then they had to deal with two sides, right? Which again is problematic, right? You want to move forward in a concerted line and push the enemy back in a uniform fashion. You don't want to leave enemies behind you so that they can attack you while you're trying to go forward, right? But that's exactly what the Nazis do. They move so fast that they don't manage to push all the Soviet soldiers back. They leave them behind the Nazi lines, right? And so that's bad strategy too. You don't want to do that if you can avoid it. And so eventually they get close to Moscow, but they can't encircle it, right? They try to build kind of a wall of men around Moscow so that nothing gets in and then starve out Moscow, but they can't do it. They can't close the gap, right? They run out of men, they run out of supplies, it's too cold, nobody has any proper winter gear, and too late, right? So it's a nice try. It works for, that Blitzkrieg, that lightning war works for Hitler in many other cases, but here it's just too far of a reach, right? He's not ready to do it. The planning isn't very good, and they just go too fast to deal with such a big enemy, right? And so it it doesn't work out for him, sadly for Hitler.
Man, if they just had weather apps.
Huh?
If they just had weather apps.
If they just had, yeah, if they just had the Weather Channel, maybe they would have pulled through, right? Last question is question number 7. Oh, yeah, we got to deal with how the U.S. got into the war. How did the U.S. get into the war?
The Japanese attacked them, and then so that's war against the Japanese. The Axis power had this try-something pact, something like that name. And so if you declare war on one of them, basically the others just jump in. So yeah, the U.S. and Japan got into war. Germany declared war on them, as if they hadn't been enemies yet.
Yeah, so we know that Germany had allied itself with Japan, which seems like a very strange thing to do because probably the Germans and the Japanese had very little to do with each other prior to this point, and of course they're thousands of miles from each other. But the Nazis felt that it would be very useful to ally with Japan because Japan could distract the Soviet Union and potentially distract the U.S. as well, right? And so there was kind of a diversion that Hitler could employ, and to some degree it kind of works, right? Although unfortunately the U.S. is sitting this war out. They're supplying Great Britain during this time, but they're not fighting. And then of course, and we'll deal with this a little bit later, we have the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. That brings the U.S. into the war. The Soviet Union is in the war. And so now we have a truly global conflict, right? So what was mostly a European war now is sort of spanning the globe, right? And we have fighting happening in the Pacific. We have it happening in Europe. We have it happening in the Atlantic, in the Middle East, in North Africa. And so we've got people fighting all over the place, right? Right, so this is just what we talked about here. So I'm just going to jump ahead a few slides. Yeah, so that was our poster from the Blitz, from the Battle of Britain. This is, of course, where we are in about 1941. And you can see here the degree to which the Nazis have invaded. It says Russia there. It should really say Soviet Union. It's a bit of a mistake, I would say. But you can clearly see that it looks like the Nazis are winning, right? At this point in the war, they've been able to take out one of their main adversaries, right? France.
Is that Germany's flag?
I think that Germany had still had its official flag, but of course, that flag would kind of be used prominently everywhere. I don't know that Hitler ever changed the German flag. I think he might have eventually. They did, and again, I don't know if it was. I don't know if he made like an official change at some point. He probably just did it. I think if he would have remained in power, it probably would have been something he did. He might have changed the German flag, but at the time, I think he hadn't made it official yet. I think. So yeah, at this point, it really looks like the Nazis are winning, right? Because France was a major threat to them. Boom, they took them out, right? And they've taken all of Eastern Europe. They've taken Norway. They're having some success or they will have some success in North Africa for a little while anyway. They've attacked one of their other threats, the Soviet Union, and for a while it looks like that's going well, right? Because they're advancing so quickly and they're having such success. So at this point in time, if you're Great Britain, you're what's that? Well, yeah, you're not, maybe it's not time to panic because the government has just said keep calm and carry on, but this doesn't look good at all, right? This looks like we've got a serious problem on our hands, right? This guy is taking over all of Europe. He's been wildly successful, and how are we going to win this, right? But again, now the Soviet Union has been brought into the war. that's going to change the calculus here, right? That's going to change what happens. And again, the US is being brought into the war in 1941 as well. So again, that's going to change the balance here. And also, both of those countries are, while not necessarily allied with each other at the moment, are certainly anti-German and anti-Japan, right? So again, that they're going to find their way, the US and the Soviet Union are going to find their way onto the team of Britain. And so Britain's going to get some, they're going to get some backup finally, right? And that's kind of what Winston Churchill, I'm just going to go here, that's kind of what Winston Churchill was talking about in his speech, right? He said that, you know, a year ago, like in 1940 during the Blitz, things looked pretty bleak, right? We weren't well armed. We didn't seem to have any friends. A lot of people thought that the sponge had been drawn across our slate. Do you have any idea what that means? The sponge had been drawn across Britain's slate. Do you want to try? They wiped them clean. Yeah, so once upon a time, 100 years ago, even before I was in school, actually even before my parents were in school, students wouldn't have paper. They would write things down. They'd have their own little chalkboard, okay? And so they'd have a piece of chalk. They'd have their own little chalkboard. You've seen chalkboards, right? Oh, thank God, okay. So they'd have their own little chalkboard. Chalkboards were often made of slate at the time, which is a type of stone, right? So yeah, the kids would write their math equations, right, and hold it up for the teacher to see, and so that's how they'd know. And then, of course, when you were done that problem, you would take a sponge and you would clean off the chalk so that you could write again. And so that's what he's saying. The sponge had been drawn across their slate. It's like they'd been... What's that? They had to memorize everything. So they would have something to write on, but then once they were done writing, they'd wipe it off and start writing again. So yeah, you'd have to memorize everything way back in the day. But again, that's the metaphor he's using, right? So it's like they'd been wiped clean, erased, their account had been liquidated, like they'd have, you know, their bank account was closed. It was all over for them, right? But here they are. They've survived the Blitz. They've armed themselves. They have two powerful friends, although the Soviet Union is kind of a frenemy, but that's okay. They have two powerful friends at the time. So yeah, in the speech, Churchill is saying, yeah, things look a little bit better now. You know, things are not so bad as they were. And yeah, and here's the lesson, right? Never give up, never give in, never, never, never. We are going to persevere. We are going to make it through this, right? And so, who's his audience for this talk? Remind me again. Yeah, the British people, and maybe more immediately. Yeah, he's at Harrowwood or Harrowsmith. I think it's Harrowsmith. Harrowsmith School for Boys. He's giving a speech there. I imagine that he used to go there. I think that's probably why he's at the school. He's talking to these young men, but he's also talking to the nation, right? So he's giving them a little bit of advice from the Prime Minister, which is kind of cool, but he's also speaking to the nation, right? And so why is that important for us to know when we're kind of analyzing this primary source? Why is it important to know who he's talking to? The meaning could vary, that's true. What else? Why is it important to know who he is speaking to? Would he have said the same thing to his wife over dinner? Probably not in this way. Might he have said the same things? Or, what's that?
Similar things.
Maybe. Is there some things that he might say to his wife over dinner that he might not say here? Certainly, right? So again, the audience determines what is said, right? So that's why we always have to know the audience and the reason for the primary source to be created, right? So yeah, Winston Churchill said all this stuff, right? We know that. But to whom did he say it, right? Because again, if he says it to his wife over dinner, he might say something different, right? He might say some of the same things like, you know, dear, as he cuts his roast beef, you know, dear, a year ago I thought we were really screwed, right? I thought it was all over for us, but now things are looking better, right? So he might have said a very similar thing. He also might have said, but we are not out of the woods yet, right? This is still a powerful enemy. I don't know how things will go. He might have said that I'm actually fearful. I fear we're going to lose, right? Or, but again, he might not have said that to the country because again, there's certain things that a country needs to hear in the middle of a war. And we might lose is not one of those things, right? Countries need to hear we're going to persevere, we're going to triumph, our country is the strongest country and the smartest country, we will prevail, right? That's what the country needs to hear, unless you want the country to sort of lose hope and give up. But again, that's not his job here, right? His job is to inspire the nation and to sort of comfort the nation, just like he's doing for these young kids, right? Yeah, anything else we need to say about Never, Never, Never? No? Anything else we have to say about that? We're good? Okay. Okay, so that was that speech. Oh, and then I've got some work for you to do. But let's take a little break first, okay? Take a little break, come back, and then I've got some reading for you to do. Okay, people, we are back. So, where are we? Yeah, so we're kind of at a bit of a turning point in the war, I guess, right? And so, kind of 1941, we have the, well, prior to that, we have the Battle of Britain ending, and so Britain coming out of the Blitz more determined than ever to win the war and to overcome. We have the Nazis attacking the Soviet Union, violating their non-aggression pact. It's cold, right? Oof. So violating their non-aggression pact, the Nazis being super successful, and then kind of getting stuck, right? And so the winter sets in, their timing is bad, their planning is kind of not very good. We see that they advance so fast they leave enemy troops behind them, which is a bad idea. And we see them kind of running out of supplies and ultimately out of men, right? And so they can't encircle Moscow, and so all of the progress they made, they kind of can't capitalize on it because they've just moved too fast and they haven't planned very well, right? And so, whoops. But of course, this Operation Barbarossa brings the Soviet Union into the war because, of course, that's what happens when somebody attacks you. It brings you into a war. And the same thing happens with the US, right, as the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, and we'll deal with them shortly. There's been stuff happening over in the Pacific related to World War II. We haven't really talked about it yet, but we'll deal with it. I kind of just like to deal with one thing at a time. Yeah, so it's a bit of a turning point. We've entered into a phase of this. Where it's kind of a global conflict now, right? We have the Soviet Union and the US involved, and so there's fighting happening in the Atlantic, as we'll read. There's fighting happening in Europe, which of course we already know, in North Africa, in the Middle East, in the Pacific. So there's battles going on all around the world. This is now a full-on global conflict, even though it kind of took a while to get going, right? There was that little phony war period at the beginning, but now things are happening, right, all around the world. I have some stuff for you to read here, and I'll give you some time to do it. But again, it occurs to me that have I posted this in Microsoft Teams? Let me check.
So do we have to do the case studies?
No, you can skip over the case studies, so the purple sections don't worry about. Just let me see if I put it into Microsoft Teams. I wish I did, but I'm kind of feeling like I didn't, which is not good. Let's see. Nope, I did not. Okay, so if you're in class here, I'll let you start reading these pages and answering these questions. If you're not in class, this section will show up in Microsoft Teams in just a minute. I just have to digitize it. So just give me 1 minute to do that, and then I'll let you start reading, and those in class can start reading right now, okay? Okay, online people, the section that you need is now posted in Microsoft Teams, so sorry about that. Okay. Ready, Shreddies? Ready? Okay. So here in this section starts out with a little bit on the Battle of the Atlantic, right? Which again is a bit of a misnomer. It's a strange name, right? Because we talked about the Battle of Britain, but it's not really a battle. It's more of a, frequent bombing of a civilian population. And here, the Battle of the Atlantic is not quite a battle, but what's going on in the Battle of the Atlantic? What does it mean? What are they talking about? Beatrice? What is this Battle of the Atlantic thing? Something about Britain and their equipment, okay. Can you give me just a little more than that? Where's their equipment coming from? North America, right? Why don't they just make it themselves, those lazy British people? Why don't they just make their own stuff?
Because the island doesn't have the raw material.
Yeah, they're an island, right? The UK or Britain is a tiny island. They have a lot of people, but they actually need to supply themselves frequently, right? And so that stuff is all coming from North America, right? From Canada and the US. And so what's Hitler's pretty reasonable plan to deal with this?
So you talk the boats that come from North America, and like some of them sank, and then their supply goes down.
Right. Want to add to that?
No, that was pretty much it.
That was good. Yeah, exactly. So the North America, the US and Canada are sending huge amounts of supplies to Britain because they don't really have anything of their own. And of course, Hitler's plan is to send his submarines out to sink all of these vessels, or at least keep them from coming to Britain, right? Because if he can do that, the British will have to surrender. They'll have no equipment, they'll have no food, and that will be the end of them, right? So this is a pretty important, keeping that sort of lifeline of supply is critically important to the British, right? And I don't know if it shows up in here or somewhere else. Maybe I have a slide. But Winston Churchill admits at one point that the Battle of the Atlantic is the most important part of the war. And if we lose this one, it's all over. And of course, he's right? Without food and supplies, as they mentioned in the text, Britain will be out of the war in less than 2 months, right? So Hitler has his submarines, his U-boats out there working hard to sink as many ships as they can. And as you can see from the numbers, they're very successful, right? Hundreds and hundreds of ships are sunk over the course of a few years. What's that?
50 to 22.
Yeah, so huge amounts of numbers, huge amounts of lives are lost, both in terms of people working on merchant ships, people who are working on military escorts, and of course the U-boat crews themselves who are also torpedoed, right? So it's a dangerous proposition supplying Britain, but of course a critical one because Britain cannot fight the war without these supplies, right?
At the same time, Germany also lost some U-boats, right?
Yeah. Well, they lose almost all of their U-boats eventually. But yeah, it's a dangerous situation to be crossing the Atlantic, but of course people have to do it in order to supply Britain, and of course the Germans are there in their U-boat wolf packs, as they call them, trying to sink as many ships as they can. And as you can see from the numbers, they're successful to some degree, right? They sink a lot of ships. It moves on to talk about this new order, and so we talked about the new order at, I think, the beginning of this chapter in terms of Hitler's plan for Germany and for Europe and for the peoples of Europe. And does it seem like that new order is kind of coming true? Well, eventually, but is he taking steps toward putting his vision into action? What's that?
At
Yeah, we see that his plans for people who are at the bottom of the social hierarchy, right? The Jewish people, the Romas, the Slavic people, all of them are, who have fallen under Nazi control, are being rounded up and either being put to work or put to death in awful, awful ways, right? So that's coming true. Is he kind of centralizing economic control and sort of, yeah, is he centralizing economic and military control in Germany? He is, right? We're seeing that workers are kind of being moved around, and if they're not productive where they are, then they are being shipped to Germany where the Germans can keep a closer eye on them and make sure that they are productive, right? How are they kind of controlling people, and how are they controlling people in territories that they've occupied outside of Germany?
So they said that in the West, they just left the order as it was. People who were their mayors, governors, city councils, they just remained there doing their stuff.
Yep.
They just kept an eye on them, obviously.
Right.
But in the East, no, they took over everything. They kicked everyone out and they started ruling directly.
Right. So Western Europe, in terms of governance, in terms of their mayors and city councils and things like that, that all stays the same. The Nazis just kind of keep an eye on them and make sure that they're doing what they should be doing. In the East, however, it's a different thing, right? And the Nazis fully take control and, again, treat these people as subhuman, right? How do they control workers? How do they control the workers? They have what? Quotas?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quotas for production. So if you work on a farm, there's a certain amount that you have to turn over to the Reich.
Yeah, if you don't meet that, then you get sent to the Reich to work there.
Right. So if you don't produce on your own, you will be sent to Germany and they will make you produce, right? It was something about the work permits, right? Yeah, so if you, yeah, in order to work, you needed a work permit. And you needed a work permit in order to get your ration card. And what do you think your ration card is good for? Food, right? So if you don't have a work permit, you don't work. If you don't have a work permit, you don't get a ration card. If you don't get a ration card, you don't eat, right? So the Germans very quickly can establish control over people because if you want to eat and work, you will kind of do what the Germans say, right? Because they're the ones who can suddenly control access to employment and to just basic food, right? So again, they make a few quick changes and suddenly, you know, everyone is kind of under their control, right? They have a very efficient system of being able to control people. Would you say that some of the things that you've read about in here add up to enslavement? Yeah, right. So again, personal individual freedoms are effectively gone, right? The state has taken charge of everything and everyone, right? Even if those city councils and those mayors were democratically elected, are they doing the will of the people? Not anymore, right? They're following what the Nazi Party tells them to do, right? So any evidence of democracy that existed in Germany is gone. Any sort of semblance of human rights is gone. And again, if you are not a pure-blooded German citizen, things look pretty bleak for you, right? Especially if you're in Eastern Europe. You know, your best case scenario is that you are, well, maybe dead, but enslaved by the Germans and working and maybe being able to feed your family. Best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you are in a concentration camp, you are being worked to death, or just executed outright, right? So things have become pretty awful, right? And again, there's, you know, individual human rights any evidence of democracy, gone, right? This is an authoritarian state where the state has become a machine and people are either useful to the machine or not. And if they're not, they are disposed of, right, in a pretty brutal fashion. I don't know about you, but I don't think I caught that detail before, but the selling of ashes to cover the roads. Did you just read that?
No.
Yeah, it was just in that section. So people from concentration camps like Auschwitz were incinerated, and then their ashes were sold to cover the roads in the winter to make them less slippery. Ugh.
Why would someone do that?
Why indeed? Right? I guess the last question here talks about the resistance, but maybe I didn't ask you to read that section. Okay, so maybe what I'll do is we'll take a pause there. Tomorrow, what's that? Did you read a little bit of it? Okay, let's deal with that then. There's in some ways there were people resisting the efforts of the Nazis, right? So clearly there was fighting going on. There were Allied armies fighting the Germans. Yes, we know that. But how did people inside these territories manage to resist the Germans? Right. So some people within occupied territories helped others escape, right? Particularly Jewish people. So there are lots of stories of Germans and other sort of residents of German-occupied territories trying to get vulnerable people out, or at the very least hiding them, right? And if you've heard of Anne Frank, anybody heard of Anne Frank? Yeah, and so Anne Frank is kind of a famous Jewish girl who was hidden by a German family in the attic of their house. And she wrote a diary, which was later recovered and read and sort of, I think, turned into a play, and probably... She was, I believe she was hidden by a German family. Yeah, so a German family hid this Jewish family, the Frank family, in their attic. And tried to keep them away from the Nazis, and were successful for a time until they were found, and that was kind of the end for them. I don't know what happened to the family, but I suspect that they were probably sent to a camp as well, or at least sent to prison. Yeah. So it's important to remember that all of these forms of resistance were super dangerous, right? So, you know, even to be a German citizen, you had to go along with the Nazi program, and if you don't, you're an enemy of the state, right? And enemies of the state get dealt with in one way, right? And so it doesn't really matter who you are anymore. So yeah, some people tried to get vulnerable people out of occupied Germany, and some of them, if they couldn't get them out, they tried to hide them in their houses, which, again, the Frank family was hidden by a German family. How else? What's that? Information gathering. Yeah, so spying on the Nazis and sending that information to the Allies, right? So you could spy. Again, super dangerous if you get caught, right? Because you become an enemy of the state.
The reports were rather outdated or inaccurate, like the reports that were sent for Market Garden. They were pretty bad.
It's true. I mean, you know, if you're not a professional spy, or if you don't have particularly useful information, maybe not that important, but people did try to resist in that way, even if it wasn't ultimately helpful. What else did they do?
They wrote, in the parcels, they wrote the wrong address.
Yeah. So important looking Nazi mail, they might mix up the address, so it takes longer to get there. Oops. What else did they do?
Did they fight directly with the Nazis?
I think it would have been dangerous to do so. You could, but you're dealing with a pretty powerful state with no respect for your rights. So unless you're gonna go on a suicide mission, there's other ways. Work slowdowns, yeah. So if you're working in a German-controlled factory, maybe you just work a little slower than normal. Maybe you're working and you drop a wrench into the machine and break it. And so, now the machine has to be fixed. Oops, I'm so clumsy. Oh, silly me, right? Well, I guess it depends on if the Germans believe that it was an accident, right? So again, all of this stuff is risky, right? Hiding people, spiriting people away, spying, mislabeling things, labor slowdowns or sabotage of machines. All of this stuff is dangerous because if you get caught, you're probably going to be executed or wind up in a camp just like the Jewish people and others, right? So all of these things are highly dangerous for anyone to engage in, but some people do, right? Maybe they don't have the means or the ability to fight directly, but they can try to resist, right? They can try to slow the Germans down in some ways, right? There's one more, I think. Yeah, they started to raid things, right? So any storage facilities for fuel or for weapons or for food, they would try to raid or destroy those, right? And so again, that's kind of sabotage. All of this stuff is super dangerous because if you get caught, it's all over for you, right? So again, it was dangerous. Probably lots of people just went along with what the Nazis were doing because it was easier and, to resist was to risk your life. But again, some people find ways to resist or find ways to sort of impede what the Nazis are trying to do. Again, I don't know how meaningful some of those things were in terms of the success of the Nazis, but I mean on a personal level for some, it had a huge impact, right? Some Jewish people were spirited out of Germany by German citizens who helped them, right? And so again, did it make an impact in the course of the war? No. Did it make an impact for that family? Absolutely, right? So again, there's a measure of perspective here. Some of these efforts probably didn't amount to much, but some of these efforts for certain people would have been incalculable, right? To have your family, evacuated from Europe by citizens who were risking their lives to get you out, right? I don't think so. I don't think there would have been. I don't think it. This is the thing: is that I don't know how you would measure. I don't think you could measure to what degree this actually affected the Nazis' ability to do anything. I think the point here is that some people tried to resist, however they could. Right? They tried to slow the Nazis down. In many cases, I don't know that it added up to much, but maybe it did. Right? If half of your mail is going missing all the time and you can't communicate, that slows you down, right? It makes it more difficult for you to do what you're trying to do. So if you've got thousands of people who are trying to interrupt what you're trying to do, maybe that makes a difference, right? Good question. Good question. It would have had to be quiet. Probably a lot of people weren't working in a centralized way. I don't know, maybe code words, maybe just, it would be very quiet, right? You would have to keep it quiet because, again, if anyone found out, you would be. Actually, another good example of hiding people is, has anyone seen or read The Book Thief? Book Thief? Yeah, there's a book and a movie. I haven't read the book. The movie is excellent. I assume the book is the same. But it's, again, it's a story centered in Germany during the Second World War, and it's the hiding, part of the story is about the hiding of a Jewish man in the, I think, the cellar of a German family. Sorry, Ahmad?
I just thought that the book thief was in Poland.
Oh, maybe it is in Poland. Yeah.
I haven't seen that movie, but I remember like some parts of it. German bombers were blowing some stuff up. So.
Maybe it's a German family in Poland. I can't remember. Anyway, okay, we're out of time. Don't forget tomorrow is the quiz. So in-class people, you should be here, but you shouldn't be here until 9 because that's when we'll do your quiz. Online people, we'll start at 8 o'clock Vancouver time, Pacific time, and we'll do the oral quiz. The information is posted in Microsoft Teams. I'm sorry I went long. Thank you for being here. Have a nice morning. Bye.